The glorious 1st of June 1794. The glorious 1st of June, also known as the Fourth Battle of Ushant 1794, was the first and largest fleet action of the naval conflict between the Kingdom of Great Britain and the First French Republic during the French Revolutionary Wars. Background. Since early 1792, France had been at war with four of its neighbours on two fronts, battling the Habsburg monarchy and Prussia in the Austrian Netherlands, and the Austrians and Piedmontese in Italy. Following the execution of the imprisoned King Louis XVI, diplomatic ties between Britain and France were broken. On 1st February, France declared war on both Britain and the Dutch Republic. The situation in Europe remained volatile into 1794. Off northern France, the French Atlantic Fleet had mutinied due to errors in provisions and pay. In consequence, the French Navy Officer Corps suffered greatly from the effects of a reign of terror. The shortage of provisions was more than a navy problem. France itself was starving because of the social upheavals of the previous year had combined with a harsh winter to ruin the harvest. By this time at war with all her neighbours, France had nowhere to turn for overland imports of fresh provisions. Eventually a solution to the food crisis was agreed by the National Convention. Food produced in France's overseas colonies would be concentrated on board a fleet of merchant ships gathered in Chesapeake Bay. It was also provisioned with ships, food and goods purchased from the new United States. During April and May 1794, the merchantmen would convoy the supplies across the Atlantic to Brest, protected by elements of the French Atlantic Fleet. The fleets. The navies of Britain and France in 1794 were at very different stages of development. Although the British fleet was numerically superior, the French ships were larger and stronger, and carried a heavier weight of shot. The largest French ships were three-decker first rates, carrying 110 or 120 guns against 100 guns on the largest British vessels. The French Navy. In contrast to their British counterparts, the French Navy was in a state of confusion. Although the quality of the fleet's ships was high, the fleet hierarchy was riven by the same crisis that had torn through France since the Revolution 5 years earlier. Consequently, the high standard of ships and ordnance was not matched by that of the available crews, which were largely untrained and inexperienced. The manpower problem was compounded by the supply crisis. In August 1793, these problems came to a head in the fleet off Brest, when a lack of provisions resulted in a mutiny among the regular sailors. The crews overruled their officers and brought their ships into harbour in search of food, leaving the French coast undefended. The National Convention responded instantly by executing a swathe of senior officers and ship's non-commissioned officers. Hundreds more officers and sailors were imprisoned, banished or dismissed from the naval service. The effect of this purge was devastating. The Royal Navy. Since the Spanish armament of 1790, the Royal Navy had been at sea in a state of readiness for over 3 years. The Navy's dockyards under First Lord of the Admiralty, Charles Middleton, were all fully fitted and prepared for conflict. This was quite unlike the disasters of the American Revolutionary War 10 years earlier. The only remaining problem was that of manning the several hundred ships on the Navy list. Unfortunately for the British, gathering sufficient manpower was difficult, so press ganging was used. In the 18th century, it was customary for regiments of infantry to be called upon to serve as marines on board ships of the Royal Navy, to supplement the regular mariner. Their role was to act as snipers firing from positions aloft onto the decks of enemy warships, and to act as boarding parties. They were also responsible for keeping their own sailors in order. Some 400 men of the 29th Foot were serving on 5 ships of the Channel Fleet under Lord Howe. He was to be sent out on a mission to intercept a French convoy of food and supplies and its escort. May 1794. The French convoy departed America from Virginia on the 2nd of April, and Lord Howe's fleet sailed from Portsmouth on the 2nd of May. Lord Howe was trying to catch up with the French fleet commanded by Villaret that was to meet the convoy on the American coast in Chesapeake Bay. Howe's fleet had contact with the rear of Villaret's fleet, attacking some French ships. Villaret had led his fleet west to lure the British away from the supply convoy. On the 28th of May, taking the bait, Howe went into action trying to split the French fleet. Both fleets were mauled and then parted. Battle was postponed during the next 2 days because of thick fog, but when the haze lifted on the 1st of June 1794, the battle lines were only 6 miles, 10 kilometres apart, and Howe was prepared to force a decisive action. 1st of June 1794. By 0812, the British fleet was just 4 miles, 6 kilometres from the enemy. By this time, Howe's formation was strung out in an organised line parallel to the French, with frigates acting as repeaters for the Admiral's commands. The French were likewise in line ahead, and the 2 lines began exchanging long-range gunfire at 0924, whereupon Howe unleashed his innovative battle plan. It was normal in fleet actions of the 18th century for the 2 lines of battle to pass one another sedately, exchanging fire at long ranges and then wearing away, often without either side losing a ship or taking an enemy. Howe's order was for British ships to cut through the French line and rake the stern and bows of the French. The plan faltered as not every commander followed or understood his orders. The battle broke into 3 parts, as the forward, centre and rear. Howe and Queen Charlotte led the fleet by example, sailing directly at the French flagship Montagne. Passing between Montagne and the next in line, Vengeur de Peuple, within an hour of their opening volleys, the British and French lines were hopelessly confused, with 3 separate engagements being fought within sight of one another. The battle, covering a large area, was fierce, with some British ships calling on frigate reserve to tow them out of danger, the frigates themselves exchanging gunfire with the French ships. For the 29th Foot, the most notable action was on HMS Brunswick, with 81 men of the regiment on board. They were played into battle with the tune Heart of Oak, which is still used today at the start of ceremonial parades. HMS Brunswick cut between Achille and Vengeur de Peuple. This manoeuvre failed when Brunswick's anchors became entangled in Vengeur's rigging. Harvey's sailing master asked Captain John Harvey if Vengeur should be cut loose, to which Harvey replied, "No, we have got her and we will keep her." The 2 ships swung so close to each other that Brunswick's crew could not open their gun ports and had to fire through the closed lids, the ships battering each other from a distance of just a few feet. Captain Harvey of Brunswick was mortally wounded early in this action by long-range gunfire from Vengeur, but refused to quit the deck, ordering more fire into his opponent. Brunswick also managed to drive Achille off from her far side when the French ship attempted to intervene. Achille, already damaged, was totally dismasted in the exchange and briefly surrendered, although her crew rescinded this when it became clear Brunswick was in no position to take possession. The fighting lasted several hours, and the captain in charge of the 29th Detachment was killed. The total losses of the British fleet were about 1,200. Of these losses in the gallant Brunswick alone were 158, over a quarter of a ship's company, and the detachment of the 29th on board lost half their number killed or wounded. The aftermath. Both Britain and France claimed victory in the battle. Britain by virtue of capturing or sinking 7 French ships without losing any of her own, and remaining in control of the battle site. For its share in the engagement, the regiment was awarded the Naval Crown as a battle honour to be borne on the regimental colour. Since the battle had been fought out of sight and land, there was no obvious name for it to bear, so it was dubbed the Glorious 1st of June, and has so remained.